Hi everyone, I'm Georgia Hott. Used to be Georgia Goodwin. Before that I was Georgia Gardner, and I have a lot of McGinn blood. I'm 60% Irish and about 20% Scottish and a little tiny percent whatever is left over European. It's fun to be here and share some stories with you. Mainly want to talk about Joe McGinn, Joseph McGinn, my grandfather. And my mother was Josephine McGinn until she married George Gardner. Joseph McGinn, my grandfather, and the patriarch of the family, as far as we know, without going any further back. He's the first one we know about. He came from Omagh, and his family had a bakery, and he was quite the rebel. He really wanted Ireland to be free of the English. And he came from Omagh, which is in the north part where the English are very strong to this day. So he got in trouble with his rebellious work, and he went to jail. Now, luckily, he had a Tory uncle, Tory being an English sympathizer. This uncle got him on a ship for the United States. And so there's the start of our family as we know it today. So when he got to the United States, luckily he was already an experienced writer for newspapers. So Joe McGinn worked for the New York Times and the Associated Press, and known by his white hair, which he doctored up with laundry bluing. It was his trademark, that shiny white hair. You can find Joe. See him? He's over there. And so there he was, established with an apartment and a job. And so now it was time to get his Katherine out of Ireland and come and marry him. It was all planned. So he got ready for her with the apartment, and she got on a ship and came to the United States. And he had the time. He knew he was supposed to meet the ship, and he was late. He was stopped for something and was late. And she waited and waited and finally gave up. She had the apartment number, of course, and she got a taxi. I think it must have been a horse and carriage kind of taxi in the late 80s. And she went to the apartment. There was a concierge taking care of the building, and she took my grandma up to the apartment, and they waited. And then they thought it would be funny. When they heard Joe coming into the building, they hid her. She jumped into a closet, and he came in, and he was very upset because he had missed her at the ship, and he didn't know where she was. So she jumped out of the closet to give him a hug, and he didn't think it was very funny. I hope she got the hug. I think she probably did, because they calmed down and started their life as a couple. We have a lovely picture of their first two children, Jack and then Kitty, sitting on their laps in the late 1880s. Quite a start. She did complete the family with my mother. She was number 10. And all the names of their children are found in the 1920 census from the United States Census. And that was fun to read all the names. So Grandma was a wonderful mom. She was quite a great, experienced baker. She just missed Ireland so much. So did Joe, but his heart was broken. He never went back to Ireland, but she went every chance she could, which was, every couple of years, she would take the boat. No airplanes in those days. I'm talking now the early 20th century is when she would be going to Ireland. And then my mother pretty much was raised by her older sister, Kitty, who's also Katherine A. McGinn, but they called her Kitty. And she was a great auntie to our family here in the United States. And now we know the cousins in Ireland also loved Aunt Kitty. So back to the story about Grandma going to Ireland. One time in about 1936, I think this happened. It was quite a storm in the North Atlantic. And she was on the ship going through that storm. And when my folks met this time, they weren't late like Joe had been so many years ago. They were right there when she came down from the ship. And they had been worried listening to the radio all night because listening to the stories about that awful storm in the North Atlantic. And when she came down, my mom said, "How was the crossing? You were in a storm." "Oh, it was like a lake," she said. What a sailor. She slept through it anyway. Grandma used to draw pictures and tell us stories when we were going. But she did live with us for some time. And we'd think of more things that she could put in the picture. It always started with Farmer Brown and a little house and a little tree. And then we'd all, as kids, we'd sit around and tell her more things to put on the paper so we could stall off going to bed. But you know what? I think the Irish are great storytellers. My mother had that talent from her mother to tell a story. And so she became a professional storyteller. And when we moved to California, she was on radio and then television. And she told stories in all the playgrounds in San Francisco. And this would be all during the 40s and 50s. I love to know that my grandmother just passed that talent on to my mother for telling stories.